If you're running from hell, you'd better pray the devil doesn't live where you're headed. But Cassidy Vale didn't pray. She ran. And she chose the one place on the map where even ghosts didn't want to linger Scorch Ridge. The sun hadn't dared peek over the razor-toothed hills when the old rail engine hissed and groaned to a halt in Scorch Ridge, a wind-tortured speck in the southern frontier. Cassidy stepped down from the dusty carriage, clutching a battered travel case in one hand and the edge of her bonnet in the other, her fingers white around the fabric. Her sky-blue dress, crumpled from endless miles of rail, looked absurdly out of place among the sand-blasted greys and browns of the station crowd. She stood out and, that was the whole point. Cassidy wasn't just escaping a city, she was abandoning a legacy. The Vale name, once wrapped in silk and whispered with reverence in the upper crust of Charleston, had become a burden its weight made heavier by scandal, disgrace, and betrayal. Now she was here, in a town where no one knew her shame or cared. At the far end of the wooden platform stood a man. He was tall, wiry, with storm-grey eyes shaded by a slouched brim. No smile, no welcome, just a firm nod and a voice like gravel. Name's Mason Cade. Cassidy hesitated, then placed her hand in his. It was rough, weathered hard-working but not harsh. He picked up her case effortlessly and gestured to the wagon tethered beside the watering trough. They rode for the better part of an hour, the wagon groaning over a sun-baked path bordered by twisted trees and scorched red rock. Cassidy tried to make polite conversation, passing remarks about the land, the weather, but Mason gave answers as lean as his frame. A yes, a no, sometimes not even that. It wasn't impoliteness. It was armor, something old and unspoken. When they arrived at his ranch, he reined the horses in front of a plain timber house surrounded by wide, empty land. Weather-worn fencing snaked into the distance, half-eaten barns leaning against time, and the fields behind the house burned orange in the fading sun. Before helping her down, Mason finally turned to her. Before you go in, know this. I don't talk about what came before, and I don't want to hear about yours. That's the deal. His voice wasn't unkind, but it was final. Cassidy nodded. Understood. That same evening, without ceremony, they were married by a half-blind justice of the peace and a twitchy, stable hand who'd had too much corn liquor. No bouquet, no kiss, just ink on paper and a legal bond that tethered two strangers in the middle of nowhere. Mason didn't share her room that night. Instead, he pointed to a door at the end of the narrow hall. Inside, the bed was made with a patchwork quilt, a chipped mirror hung lopsided, and a single window stared out at the infinite dusk. Day starts before the sun, he said. Don't be late. When he shut the door, Cassidy sat stiffly on the bed. Her hands brushed the worn embroidery of the pillowcase. She listened to the wolves wailing somewhere out in the black and the dry wind whispering through the gaps in the walls. This was her new life. She had walked away from lace gloves and silver spoons, from towering parlors and brittle smiles, from a world that punished her for one mistake, punished her enough to push her into the arms of a man like Harold Morley. A trade tycoon twice her age, with liver spots, rotting morals, and a touch that clung too long. Her father had arranged the match without asking. Disobedience was treason in the Vale house. So she fled, clutching train tickets and aliases, until she stumbled on a single line in a newspaper. Rancher seeks wife, past not required, no questions allowed. It had seemed like destiny. Now it felt like a wager. The following morning, a rooster's cry ripped through the chilled air before dawn, shattering the silence that hung heavy over the land. Cassidy stirred, bones aching, sleep elusive. The wind had whistled through the rafters all night, and Mason's warning still echoed in her mind. No questions. She dressed in silence, slipping into a homespun blouse and skirt folded neatly on a chair. They were loose at the waist and patched at the elbows, but freshly laundered. Someone, probably Mason, had prepared them without comment. He never asked, never explained, never smiled. Outside, the land was already waking. Chickens darted about in the yard. A dog barked at shadows. Mason moved across the grounds with practiced ease, guiding a young horse to the trough. Cassidy approached slowly, uncertain in this strange rhythm. "Morning," she offered, voice light. He didn't glance her way. "Grab a bucket." She did, and they worked. Hours passed with little more than chore instructions exchanged. Haul this, clean that, tie this. Her hands were raw by midday, soft palms bleeding into calluses, but she bit her tongue. She'd learned to endure long before she ever set foot in Scorch Ridge. Back east, silence was the law of women. Her mother enforced it with corsets and cold eyes. Her father enforced it with business contracts disguised as courtship. Harold, with whiskey on his breath, enforced it with touch. Cassidy had escaped all of them with a single word, no, and then she ran. Now she was here, blistered and unseen. A ghost, rebuilding from splinters. Later that day, Cassidy sat on the porch steps, hands wrapped in a damp cloth. Mason passed by with a sack of grain, paused to glance at her bandaged fingers. "You'll either toughen up or fall apart," he said, voice even. Then he kept walking. It wasn't cruel, it was honest. In some strange, scorched way, Cassidy respected that more than any of the velvet-coated lies she'd been spoon-fed in Charleston. Mason Cade didn't fake kindness, didn't perform warmth. But something simmered beneath his cool surface, something untold. That night, over a meal of dry cornbread and lukewarm beans, he finally spoke without being prompted. "You don't need to like it here, just stay." Cassidy lowered her fork with deliberate care. "I didn't come here for comfort." He looked up, finally meeting her eyes, and for a flicker of a moment, something broke through recognition, or maybe warning. "Good," he said. The silence returned, but heavier this time. Waited. She watched him in the flicker of the oil lamp. He wasn't cruel, but there was a break in him, like a man who'd once had softness beaten out of his bones. She wanted to ask him then, "What did they do to you?" But the rule was carved in stone, no questions. And truth be told, she wasn't ready for her own answers either. The third morning came sharp and bitter. Frost painted the windows. The air howled through the seams of the old house like it had teeth. Cassidy draped a shawl around her shoulders and moved barefoot through the creaking floorboards. The silence had taken on a shape now. It wasn't just absence, it was presence, like the house was holding its breath. She explored more than before. The kitchen was sparse but kept, the pantry only half stocked, the furnishings humble but handled with care. Clearly, this house had seen only one person for a long, long while. But there were limits, doors that didn't open, cabinets with old locks, a staircase to the attic nailed shut. She didn't force it. Not yet. But the house was murmuring to her now. There are things you're not meant to know. Mason left early that day. A note sat on the table. Fence line. Back by noon. No greeting, no goodbye. She filled her morning with tasks gathering eggs, sweeping the porch. But her mind kept wandering. The attic, the sealed drawers, the things he never spoke of. After lunch, she returned to the kitchen and found a cupboard beneath the sink ajar. Behind the jars and rags sat a wooden box polished from use. She hesitated, then drew it out. Inside lay a single photo. A young woman with gentle eyes held a small boy on her lap, 5, maybe 6. The boy had Mason's eyes. No date, no name, just worn edges and mystery. Cassidy's heart thudded. Who were they? Where were they now? Then the front door creaked. She snapped the lid shut and slid the box back under the sink as Mason walked in, shirt damp, arms streaked with blood. "Barbed wire," he muttered when he caught her stare. She said nothing, pretended not to have seen the past under her sink. That evening, the silence at dinner stretched taut like wire, but Mason was watching her now, not with suspicion, but curiosity, as if he could feel her questions press against the walls of his rules. Cassidy finally broke the hush. "The wind here doesn't sleep." Mason tilted his head, considering her. Some secrets are kept behind locked doors. Others ride straight at you on horseback, raising the dust of dead stories. Cassidy Vale wasn't just living with ghosts now. She was about to meet the one that wouldn't stay buried. And when people start whispering your name in a town that doesn't ask questions, you know something's about to break. "That's how you know you've outrun the world," Mason said, finally replying as he stabbed another bite of beans with the dull end of his fork. Cassidy's fingers twitched beneath the table. The image of that photograph, the young woman, the boy with Mason's eyeshad seared itself into her thoughts. She wanted to ask, to know, but her tongue stayed still. Instead, she took a different route. "Do you miss it? The world before all this?" Mason chewed slowly, eyes focused on a knot in the wooden table, and swallowed hard. Then he met her gaze with that same unflinching steadiness. Number, just that one word, not harsh, just closed. Cassidy nodded, quietly, and returned to her plate, though the food had long lost its flavor. That night, she lay awake again, staring up at the ceiling's old beams, while the wind moaned like a widow outside. The woman in the photo wouldn't leave her mind. Cassidy had fled from betrayal, but here she had stumbled into a place where the past wasn't just buried, it was bolted inside the walls. and she feared one of those stories might soon unbolt itself. It was the following Tuesday that Cassidy first rode into Scorch Ridge officially as Mrs. Cade. Mason had handed her a slip of paper, handwriting tight and neat. Flour, kerosene, nails, coffee. Nothing more. No guidance, no offer to join her, just a silver coin and a nod before he disappeared into the barn like smoke. So she hitched the wagon and went alone. From the wagon seat, the town looked differentless, hostile, more curious. Faces appeared behind sun-bleached curtains. Conversation quieted when she passed. It wasn't animosity. It was something far sharper attention. At the general store, a bell jingled as she stepped inside. A broad woman behind the counter looked up and tilted her head. "You must be the new Cade woman," she said, not unkindly. Cassidy mustered a smile. "Looks that way." The woman chuckled, shaking her head. "Well, that's something. Didn't think he'd try again." Cassidy's breath caught. "Again?" Before she could ask, the woman gave her a sharper look. "He didn't tell you about the first one?" Cassidy's hand tightened around her list. "No," she said. The storekeeper's lips pressed together. "Well, maybe that's for him to tell." Cassidy finished her errands in silence, the sound of each coin drop and boot step amplified in the quiet room. As she stepped back into the sunlight, a croaky voice called across the street. "Looks like he found another one." An old man with a cane stood leaning outside the saloon, talking to the wind. Poor girl. Cassidy didn't look back. She climbed into the wagon, her stomach twisting as she urged the horses forward. Back at the ranch, Mason was splitting logs with deliberate strikes, muscles moving beneath his shirt like coiled ropes. He didn't glance up when she arrived, didn't ask how it went. But as she walked past, she felt his eyes on her, watching. That night, Cassidy couldn't hold her tongue. "The woman at the store," she said carefully as they sat across from each other at the table, "she mentioned someone else. Before me." Mason's fork stopped midair. He set it down slowly. "We had a deal," he said, not angry, just resolute. "I know," Cassidy replied. "But the town's already talking. I'd rather hear it from you." Mason stood and crossed to the window, resting his hands on the sill. He didn't leave. Not this time. His voice came low, steady. "Her name was Lorna. We married young. Had a son." Cassidy's heart thudded. "The photo." "They're gone," he said flatly. "That's all." Silence fell again, thick and unsettled. But the way he said it, "that's all," felt more like a beginning than an end. That night, Cassidy lay in bed, staring into darkness. Lorna. The town remembered her. Mason didn't speak of her. And Cassidy? Cassidy was beginning to wonder whose shadow she'd stepped into. The days that followed bled into each other. The ranch carved itself into her skin blisters on her palms, the rhythm of 5 a.m. air, wind slithering under the doors like a whisper that never stopped. But something had shifted between them. Mason still didn't talk much, but when he handed her a tool, it wasn't tossed. It was placed gently. When she struggled with a bale of hay, he lifted it silently, gave her a brief nod that said, "You're trying, that's enough." She couldn't say exactly when the fear faded. Maybe it was the morning he left a jar of honey beside her coffee, capsulant, but precise. He had noticed she drank it sweet. Or when he returned from town with a simple tin comb and laid it next to her mirror without explanation. These were not declarations, they were quiet offerings. And then came the storm. It descended over the plains like a warfront black cloud stampeding across the sky. Cassidy was scattering feed for the chickens when the first wave of wind slammed into her, sending grain and feathers flying. She turned to run, but the sky cracked open above her. Rain poured like it had been waiting all year. She was halfway to the house when her foot caught a rut and she collapsed, her ankle twisting beneath her. Mud coated her hem. Her cry was lost in the thunder. Then he was there. Mason appeared out of the haze, lifting her into his arms without a word. He carried her inside, his jaw clenched against the rain. In the kitchen, he set her gently on the table, knelt down, and pushed her dress up just to her calf. "Broken?" he asked. I don't think so," she whispered. He studied the swelling, then fetched a cloth and whiskey. Without asking, he began wrapping her ankle, deft, steady, practiced. Cassidy watched his face. There was worry there, hidden behind the lines. When he looked up, his face was inches from hers. She could see the faint stubble along his jaw, the flecks of warmth in his stone-colored eyes. "You should have stayed inside," he said. She raised her brow. "You should have told me a storm was coming." For the briefest second a smile, not full, just a flicker at the corner of his mouth, but it was real. Cassidy laughed, caught off guard. "You don't scare easy, do you?" he asked, almost admiringly. She blinked. "Should I be scared?" He paused. "Maybe," he said softly. "Not of me, just of life here." The silence between them changed shape again, less like a wall, more like a doorway. Something unspoken passed between them, uncertainty maybe, or hope. That night, she didn't return to her room right away. Her ankle throbbed, but her heart was louder. Mason Cade was a man built from fences and rules, but for one moment, in the rain, with his hands on her skin, she'd seen something unguarded. And that terrified her more than any locked door. Because she wanted in. It started with hooves fast, pounding too hard for a neighbor, not the soft rhythm of a friendly visit. Cassidy froze on the porch, a sloshing bucket in her hands, dust curled in the distance. One rider. Alone. Charging. Her ankle still ached, but instinct took over. She set the bucket down slowly, took a step back toward the house, and waited. Some ghosts wear bowler hats. Some carry guns. But the worst kind? They know your name. Cassidy Vale hadn't outrun her past after Alid had just taken the long road to find her. And now it was here, in a cloud of dust, wearing a smile that didn't reach the eyes. The rider came fast, gravel kicking behind him in a wave. His boots hit the earth before the horse even stopped moving. Mid-40s, clean-cut in a way that didn't belong to this landslick coat, polished shoes, and a bowler hat that had never seen sweat. But his eyes were blade-sharp, cold, calculated. "Cassidy Vale," he said before tipping his hat. The blood drained from her face. Her silence was answer enough. He smiled, slow and cruel. "Knew it. Been looking for you." She took a step back. "Who are you?" she asked. "Old friend of your daddy's, named Silas Bray. He's been mighty torn up, you know. Thought something unfortunate might have happened." Cassidy's jaw set. "Whatever he paid you, it's wasted." Silas's grin widened. "Didn't come for the money, darling. Came for leverage. Your old man's made enemies, and you're a walking safety net." He took a step closer. "You're coming with me, quiet-like, or I make a scene this town won't forget." But Cassidy didn't have to respond, because Silas Bray wasn't alone anymore. Mason stood behind him, still as death, his revolver already raised level, steady, unmoved. "Let her go." Silas turned, caught off guard. "Now hold on," he started. Mason stepped forward. No theatrics, no warning shot, just steel. "You don't belong here, off my land." Silas glanced between them, Cassidy, the gun, the horse. "You protecting her, you don't even know who she is." "I know enough," Mason said. "She's a liar, a thief. Her family's rotten." Mason cocked the hammer. "Leave?" Silas mounted, the heat of frustration behind his thin smile. "You'll regret this." And then he was gone and vanished in dust and tension. Cassidy stood frozen. Only when Mason holstered the weapon did she realize she was crying. "He'll come back," she whispered. Mason didn't answer, just walked inside. She followed. In the kitchen, he paced once, twice, then stopped. He knelt beside the cabinet beneath the sink and pulled out the box she'd once seen. No hesitation now. He placed it on the table, opened the lid. Inside more than photos, letters, a birth certificate, a death notice. Her name was Lorna, he said, not looking at Cassidy, just staring at the boy in the picture. "My wife, my son, gone." Cassidy stayed quiet. He reached in, pulled out a tiny wooden horse-worn smooth. She said she was going to town, took him with her, never came back. I searched for weeks, months. His voice faltered. Then I learned the truth. She left, ran off with a man from Tucson, told everyone I was dangerous, that she feared me. Cassidy's heart ached. "Were you?" she asked, her voice a thread. He looked at her. "Not then." The silence that followed wasn't a wall, it was a wound, finally breathing. Cassidy reached out, touched his hand. He didn't move. "You protected me today," she said, even not knowing the full truth. He nodded slowly. "Because I've been left behind before. I won't do it again." Outside, the wind picked up, but inside, something finally stilled. They weren't strangers anymore, just two people dragging scars behind them, learning to walk side by side. Cassidy woke before dawn, heart pounding from dreams she couldn't hold on tocos, of a child's laughter, a woman's voice on the wind. The room felt colder, not from the air, but from what hung heavy between the walls. Mason hadn't spoken much since Silas arrived. He'd gone quiet again, deeper this time, as if cracking open that box had let something escape that couldn't be put back. Cassidy didn't want to pry, but silence had never saved her before, and she couldn't breathe in this house of ghosts any longer. So that morning, while Mason mended fences in the far field, Cassidy made a decision. She climbed the attic stairs. The latch was nailed shut, but one nail was loose. Just enough. She wedged a spoon under it, pried until it popped. The attic smelled like forgotten time, dust, and grief that had been packed away. Light filtered through a slit window, washing over shrouded shapes. She lifted one canvas, a cradle, another an old trunk, locked with a rusted clasp. Her breath caught. The lock gave after a few tugs. Inside tiny blankets, shoes the size of a hand, a half-written letter, and a journal. Lorna scratched faintly into the leather cover. Cassidy hovered, then opened it. The entries were brief, fractured, but clear. Mason is good, but distant. He doesn't speak of the war. Sometimes he looks at our son like he's remembering someone else. Then the final entry, just weeks before she vanished. I'm tired of waiting for him to see me. There's a man in Tucson who says I deserve more. I think I believe him. Cassidy closed the book. Her chest ached. Lorna hadn't been driven away by cruelty. She'd been erased by grief. Mason had built walls around himself long before she left. And now Cassidy Shea was climbing those walls. A floorboard creaked behind her. She turned. Mason stood at the top of the stairs. No shouting, no anger, just quiet eyes. You weren't meant to find that, he said. Cassidy rose slowly. I needed to understand who you were, who you are. His jaw tightened. I'm a man who lost everything, who learned questions bring pain. She stepped forward. I'm not Lorna, and you're not the man you were. He looked away. How do you know? Her voice shook, but she held firm. Because the man who pulled me out of the rain, who stepped between me and a bullet, he still believes in protecting someone, even if he's forgotten how to protect himself. For a moment, the attic said nothing. Then Mason took a step closer. You shouldn't have come up here, he murmured. And yet, she said gently, you didn't stop me. He exhaled slow. Something softened in his face. He reached past her and shut the trunk, not harshly, gently. Come downstairs, he said. Not a command, an invitation. And she followed, not because all the questions had answers, but because, for the first time, he wanted to try. The next morning felt different. Not light, but alive. The house had exhaled something it had been holding. Cassidy woke to the smell of frying eggs and the sound of a pan scraping over iron. In the kitchen, Mason was already there, pouring black coffee into 2 battered mugs. He didn't say good morning, he didn't need to. He slid a cup toward her. That was enough. They ate in silence, but not the kind that bruised, the kind that healed. Cassidy watched him closely, his shoulders still stiff, but the lines around his mouth softened. No more masks. Just a man who'd bled through too much silence, still standing. After breakfast, Mason spoke. You were right. Cassidy paused, lowering her mug. About what? I didn't stop you from going up there, because I needed to know if you'd stay after seeing everything. She didn't hesitate. I'm still here. Mason nodded, and for the first time he smiled. Real, subtle, but true. But peace never lasts long. By late afternoon, the dog went wild, sharp barks, unrelenting. Cassidy stepped out onto the porch just as 3 riders appeared at the edge of the property. Silas Bray was back, and this time he wasn't alone. 2 more men flanked Himony tall and broad, the other lean, mean-eyed, and too calm to be safe. Mason appeared beside Cassidy instantly. Get inside, he said. No, she replied. He looked at her. She didn't blink. I'm not hiding. Silas stopped at the fence line. You thought this was done? He called. That little show last time wasn't enough. Mason stepped down off the porch. This is my land. You step on it again, it's trespassing. You draw a weapon, it's war. Silas laughed, sliding off his horse like a showman. She doesn't belong here. She's got people who want her back. Cassidy stepped forward. They didn't want me. They wanted what they could control. Silas's grin twisted. That so? Daniel's voice turned low, dangerous. You heard her. One of Silas's men reached for his belt. Cassidy's heart stuttered. But Mason was faster. His gun was out in a blink, aimed, steady, not shaking. Nobody moved. The air snapped tight. "We're not doing this here," Silas muttered finally, backing off. He looked at Cassidy one last time. "You think he's your salvation? Just wait. Men like him always turn." Mason didn't move, didn't flinch. They rode off in silence. But the silence they left behind wasn't peace. It was a countdown. Some people run from danger, others run from who they used to be. Cassidy Vale and Mason Cade had spent their lives hiding from ghosts, but now there was nowhere left to run, because healing doesn't wait for the brave. It happens when you stay still long enough to let someone see the broken parts. The air still hummed with tension when Cassidy turned to Mason, voice soft but certain. "He's wrong, is he, about who you used to be?" Mason slowly holstered his revolver, his face unreadable in the low light. "I've been a lot of things," he said. "A fighter, a husband, a man who ran from what scared him most. Then he met her. I truly met them. But if it's still up to me, I'd like to be something else now." Cassidy stepped closer, fingertips brushing his. "You already are." They didn't kiss. They didn't speak. But in the long stretch of twilight, with shadows like old memories crawling across the ground, something between them finally broke open. Not the hurt, not the history, but the fragile shape of what could come next. The following days passed in an unfamiliar calm. Silas Bray and his men never returned. Maybe it was Mason's gun that kept them away. Maybe it was Cassidy's resolve. No one could say for sure. But in their absence, something rare settled over the ranch stillness. And in that quiet, Cassidy and Mason began to breathe differently. They still worked in silence as always, but it was no longer a barrier. It was a rhythm, a shared language. He let her take charge of the feeding schedule without comment. She found herself humming while repairing old leather straps. At night, he lingered by the table as she read aloud from a worn journal she kept beside her bed. It wasn't romance in the storybook sense. No fireworks, no grand speeches, but it was steady. It was earned. And then came the night Mason didn't go to bed first. Instead, he sat on the porch as the stars blinked into view. Cassidy joined him, draping a shawl across her shoulders. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to think love looked like flowers and handwritten letters, grand gestures, dramatic declarations." Mason didn't interrupt. "But now," she continued, "I think maybe love looks like sitting next to someone in the silence and not needing to run anymore." There was a long pause before he spoke. "I made a lot of mistakes," he said, "with Lorna, with my son. I thought if I didn't let myself feel again, I couldn't break again." Cassidy turned toward him. "But pain doesn't disappear just because you bury it." He nodded, slow. "You weren't what I expected when I placed that ad." She smiled gently. "You weren't what I expected when I answered it." For the first time, she saw him not, the man wrapped in shadows, but the man beneath them. The weight he'd carried, the grief he never named, the need he buried. She reached out and touched his hand. "You're allowed to want again, Mason." He stared at their joined hands. "I don't know if I deserve it." She leaned in slightly. "Then let it be grace, not something earned, something given." The prairie wind stirred around them, carrying sage and dust and the hush of things that used to hurt. Mason looked at her, voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." "For what?" "For staying, for not flinching when you saw what was behind the door." Cassidy laid her head on his shoulder. "I wasn't just running from my father, or that life, I think. I was running from myself, from the lie that I was only worth something when I was needed." Mason let out a long breath. "You're not useful to me, Cassidy," she tensed. But then he added softly, "You're everything to me." Tears pooled in her eyes, but this time she didn't hide them. In the silence that followed, there were no ghosts left. No masks, just two people sitting in the ruins of their old lives, choosing slowly, carefully to build something new. Spring came with little fanfare. Snow melted in winding streams. Wildflowers bloomed where dust had once ruled. The ranch began to breathe again, and so did the people living on it. Cassidy stood by the paddock, watching Mason work with a colt. He didn't shout, didn't force, just moved steady, patient, letting the animal learn the rhythm of trust. She realized he'd done the same with her, and she had stayed. The townsfolk changed too. The whispers stopped. When she visited the store, people greeted her by name. The shopkeeper handed her tea without asking, and the old man, who once called her poor thing, tipped his hat now with quiet respect. Mason never spoke of Lorna again. He didn't need to. Some griefs don't leave, they just stop screaming. Cassidy understood. She carried her own sorrows like lace tucked beneath her collar, but together they had stopped bleeding. That evening, as the hills turned gold in the sun's fading light, she brought 2 mugs of coffee to the porch. Mason was already seated, hat in his lap. She passed him the cup and sat beside him. He took a sip and said, "I've been thinking about fixing up the barn." She arched a brow. "You've been thinking that for 3 months." He smiled. "Yeah, but this time I mean it." She nudged him. "I believe you." He turned to her, serious now. "I want to paint the bedroom that yellow you like." She froze. "You hate that color." "Yeah," he said, "but you love it." Her throat tightened. "You don't have to change for me, Mason." "I'm not changing," he replied, placing his hand over hers. "I'm choosing." The warmth of his hand pulsed through her chest like sunlight. He looked back toward the house. "This place, it's been a museum to loss. Locked doors, old boxes, dust. I want to open it, let it breathe again." She nodded. "And what about us?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't have any fairy tale promises, but if you'll have it, I'll give you something better." She looked at him. "What's that?" "A life. Shared, honest, maybe quiet, but real." Cassidy didn't cry. She didn't need to. Her silence was answer enough. That night they ate by candlelight, laughing over burnt biscuits and how the dog had dragged in a rabbit half its size. No declarations, no speeches. Just the slow unfolding of something neither of them thought they'd ever find again. And when the lamps were dark and stars spilled across the ceiling like memory, Cassidy whispered into the night, "Thank you for finding me." From beside her, Mason answered softly, "You found me first." Outside, the wind moved on, endless and indifferent. But inside the house that had once held only ghosts, there was warmth now, there was peace, there was something that felt like home. And most importantly, there was no need for questions anymore. Only the quiet, enduring promise of what comes next. Sometimes, the people we flee from aren't half as dangerous as the truths we run from inside ourselves. Cassidy ran from a world that wanted to control her. Mason shut himself off from a world that tried to break him. But together, they found something neither expected. Love isn't loud, it isn't perfect, it's patient, it's quiet, and it begins when the questions end. What did this story awaken in you? Have you ever met someone who helped you see yourself differently without trying to fix you? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and tell us what part of the journey moved you most. And if this story touched something in your heart, don't forget to like, follow, or subscribe for more powerful tales of love, resilience, and quiet courage.